Welcome, everyone, to today's show. I'm JJ Flazanes, your producer and empowerment strategist. Thank you for downloading today's episode. Today's episode is very feisty and fiery. I will warn you ahead of time. I get a little feisty in the YouTube video because I just want to make sure that I'm attracting the right audience and that people that are finding me by searching Dr. William Davis understand what they're getting involved in. So with no further ado, today's show is called Undoctored. It is based on his book, Undoctored, which came out in 2017. And we're going to be doing another show in the near future on his newest book coming out called Super Gut. When you hear today's show, you'll hear me at the end ask him if he'd have me on his new podcast. And in fact, he is. So I invite you to tune in to Dr. Davis's podcast to hear me talk about the relationship between emotions and disease. Just to remind you, Dr. William Davis is the author of the New York Times #1 bestseller, Wheat Belly, Lose the Wheat, Lose the Weight, and Find Your Path Back to Health, the book that turned the nutritional world by storm by challenging the conventional wisdom of healthy whole grains, exposing the changes introduced into modern wheat by geneticists responsible for an astounding range of adverse health effects. He's also the author of New York Times Bestsellers, Wheat Belly Cookbook, Wheat Belly 30-Minute or Less Cookbook, and Wheat Belly Total Health. Dr. Davis has discussed his views on major media, including The Dr. Oz Show, Live with Kelly, Fox TV, and CBS This Morning, and has been featured in Prevention Magazine, First for Women Magazine, and the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, Chicago Tribune, and the New York Post, Women's World Magazine, Boing Boing, Huffington Post, and others. Enjoy today's feisty conversation. Welcome to the show, everyone. If you're hearing this on the podcast, know that we do have a video. You can come on over to jjflazanes.tv to watch. Dr. William Davis and I have this very exciting, it's exciting to me, it might piss a lot of you off, conversation, because I'm really excited. I've been chomping at the bit for weeks. I'm like, what direction are we going to go in? So here's the disclaimer I'm going to make to you all. Today, we're going to talk about his book, Undoctored, which came out in 2017. Nothing's really changed in the world. Maybe it's worse. I don't know that it's any better. But I'm going to push some limits today. And so if you're the person, just know that if you're the person who has had amazing experiences with your doctor, you've had to go to the hospital, you've had a life-saving procedure, I'm not discounting any of that. And we're not going to discount any of that. What we want to do is empower you in the ways in which you might be suffering or other people that you know needlessly when it costs too much, it takes too much time, or you're given the wrong advice, whatever. So please know, especially if you're finding this on YouTube, if you're finding this on YouTube and you're here for Dr. William Davis, let's just cut to the chase right now. I started doing this with my more famous clients. Where can they find you if they want more of just you? Because I seem to be a catalyst that piss people off when they don't want to look in the mirror. So where can they just find you if they don't like me?
I'm in a transition, JJ, where I have so many online properties that are all in all different directions. I'm consolidating. But it won't happen probably till the end of the year. It'll be Dr. Davis Infinite Health, and we'll consolidate my Wheat Belly blog, the busiest place of all, that's had 33 million visits. The Undoctored Inner Circle, Undoctored blog, some of the private Facebook pages. So it will become Dr. Davis Infinite Health. You know, JJ, I'm not about putting myself front and center. As you know, it's about the message and the mission, not about being on camera. I don't really care to be on camera, but there's so much wrong, as you've pointed out, in the status quo in healthcare that, and it's become such a burden to carry so many sites. I'm putting it all together into one place. And I have a new book coming out in February.
I know. We're going to talk about that too, about the biome, right?
Super Gut. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we talked about that on the first episode you and I did together, but in between again, in one way, I'm late to the party, but I'm not, because it's perfect timing for me. I find things when it's the right time to bring the message into the world for me, and then for others to be attracted to that message. So I think it's very smart you're consolidating, but I say that up front because YouTube's different than my podcast community. My podcast community, if they've been with me for a while, they know, like, and trust me. Those that are searching you, that find me on YouTube, don't necessarily like me and don't care to hear what I have to say. I'm warning all of you people on YouTube, I'm going to have a conversation. This is my show. If you don't like it, tough shit. So go find Dr. Davis on his own channel and go to town. Go to town there. I invite you to follow him, buy his books, do his programs, be involved. If you're searching for him and by the end of this, you don't like me, totally cool. All right, now, literally, this book, I also wanted to make one more disclaimer. The people that are listening to my podcast, again, are seekers of truth, They are mostly older souls. They know there's something more. They identify themselves as powerful, empowered beings who there's definitely something more than what the normal mass consciousness is aware of. And so those people are probably open, even if they don't agree with everything that comes out of your mouth or my mouth because of whatever reason, but they're patient enough. Now, those of you that are watching on YouTube and you don't know me, and maybe you know Dr. Davis because you were searching him, that's how you got here. We're going to take a position, and we're going to take a position in order to, again, empower you. So it might sound like at first there's a lot of negativity, and especially for my community, they're not going to like that because they're going to be like, well, that doesn't help me. But know that once we have to give you some of the hard facts that you're unwilling to accept or look at, we'll follow it up with the ways in which you can help yourself. So the title of the book is Undoctored: Why Healthcare Has Failed You and How You Can Become Smarter Than Your Doctors. 6 steps to seizing control over your health. So know that, keep listening. And some of it for me, I don't know if I explained this to you last time we had this conversation about wheat belly. I'm a highly intuitive person. I have many planets in Sagittarius. I'm a huge truth seeker. I question everything, and I always have, not to exhaustion, but I just want to know. I ask questions. I'm not afraid to ask a question. So to me, that seems like common sense. And when I intuitively know that there's something wrong with the system, I've been working in functional medicine since 2007. I was in a functional medicine clinic as a personal trainer alongside a functional medicine doctor and a registered dietitian, all up to date with the newest research and science that comes out about every kind of everything from bioidentical hormones to keto diets, whatever it is that we're learning about right now, we're on top of it. So I've been exposed to for the longest time, and not to mention before that, in the personal training industry, they don't trust doctors. So we just had this sort of distrust, and not walking in negative, just knowing that I'm a person, you're a person, you've learned things, I've learned things. I'm going to ask a question, you're going to give me an answer. If I don't like your answer, I'm going to ask you another question, but I'm not just going to listen to you blindly. And that's me. Now, so what happens is when I read your book and I listen to your book, I get pissed. Because you are so good at delivering all of the information that I don't want to know about, but I do know it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I know it goes on, but I don't want to get down to the nitty gritty. Like I bought this book for my parents yesterday. Now my parents they're not me at all. They're not like me at all. And I just bought it because I thought I needed to as a duty. Whether they ever read it is up to them. But you literally lay out in this book, and I want every single one of you, if you do not have this book, you have to get this book. And you also do not want to share this show with anyone not willing or open. Please, please, please do me and Dr. Davis a favor. Do not share the show with someone who's not open. Ask them before you share it, and buy them the book. If you want a way around it, just buy them a book and have it shipped to their house. You can do it anonymously. All right. So what happens when I read your book or I'm listening to it and I have the hard copy on the way? Oh my God, I'm so pissed. I'm so mad that I want to go out and scream at everybody like, wake up. But I also know that doesn't work. I also know very well it doesn't work. So I have some questions for you. And that's why I wanted to set the stage here for this conversation, because I want you to share some of these things, but I want everybody to read the book. And then I want to go into the now of what's happening now. And then I'm going to go into how do we, what are the ways in which we can start to bring our power back into ourselves. So I have so much to say. One question: how was this book received in 2017 by other physicians, by the medical community? Because you would not be able to publish this right now. You'd be ripped off the shelves immediately right now.
Well, it was the first time I realized that all of us, you, me, other authors on health topics, have all been blacklisted by big media. They actually, around the time Undoctored came out, all big media outlets, NBC, CBS, cable, convened committees. They actually do this. This is true. They convene committees to bat down specific topics and authors. And that's why, in years past, once a week, you'd have a book author on some health topic, nutrition, supplements, something like exercise. Now we have zero. Nothing, as well as any kind of expose, like a 60 Minutes type expose, zero on health, because it's against the interests of big pharma, a major advertiser on most media, broadcast and print. I've even heard this, JJ, from publishers. If we can't make money, because none of us get on TV anymore, if we can't make money printing books, publishing books on health, maybe we won't publish books on health anymore. So it's kind of like a Hitler book burning of a different sort. But this is what we're up against. And that's why what you're doing is so important. I started my own podcast. I'm way behind you, but YouTube channel, because we have to. Otherwise, big pharma and its exploitative ways are winning.
Well, they're very powerful. They've got a lot of money, and they've got the whole country and everybody brainwashed about this idea that they have their best interest in heart. I mean, your first in the book, the 5 myths, right? Healthcare is about healing. On the walk today on Wednesday mornings, my partner Doug and I go for a hike in the morning, and I was telling him about one of the, I guess, comparisons that you make in the book, that healthcare is no more about health and healing than gambling is about your retirement fund. Right. And you do several of them in the book. Right. But we have doctors are all knowing, like, all the myths. And again, I'm like, yep. Like, and these are things that you're not, minus the data. And you break down even some of the way that they take the research that's skewed anyway, and they take that 1.1% and the math they do to make it 36% in the media, making it look like it's an amazing thing when actually it really doesn't do anything. It's not a big difference. I mean, even like, this is so linear and chock full of real information for the person who's skeptical to really look at this. See, I'm not skeptical because I already know it, but I don't need to read it or know anymore. And when I do, it pisses me off and it gets me into this like, and that's not necessarily the best place to be, because I've been towing the line here on this show a little bit during this time space because of obvious reasons, because there are, I used to hear stories of doctors that would go against pharma and they'd die. I mean, like, I feel like everyone who wants to put themselves out there with truth literally has an opportunity to have bad things happen because they want to silence the people that are making people question what's going on in the world. What happened? I see 800, 4.5-star reviews on the book, but what was the retro at that time for Undoctored in the medical community, in the hospitals and pharma and anyone?
Mostly silence. There's something we call willful ignorance. That is, if your money is made by doing bypass operations, you don't really care about knowing about how heart disease is caused, for instance. If your money is in chemotherapy, radiation, and this cancer surgery, you don't really care about preventing cancer. And so there's this willful ignorance on the part of my colleagues to concentrate on only the things that yield substantial revenues. And the greater the revenue return, the more attention is focused on it. So that's why there's all this attention, for instance, on organ transplant. Organ transplant should be a rare thing, but they're trying to make it much more of a main because it pays so well. That's why biologics are talked about. So biologics like monoclonal antibodies and TNF alpha inhibitors to block autoimmune diseases are terrible drugs. They're horrible. If liver failure is at the top of the list of side effects of a drug, it's not a very good drug. And yet they push these drugs because they charge typically $3,000, $4,000, $20,000 a month. And so if there's a way, for instance, to stop, reverse, put an end to, let's say, rheumatoid arthritis or psoriasis, they don't want to know. Even if the science came out that we have, just take these 5 steps, for instance, and your rosacea goes away, they won't know about it or they won't care because there's no revenue return on that activity, on that knowledge. And so the whole, JJ, I'm sure you thought the same thing when you were part of a practice. In what other industry can a purported expert be completely ignorant and have almost no knowledge of what they claim to be expert at? So this happens. I'm sure this happens to you. You sit in the room with a doctor and you realize you know a hell of a lot more than the doctor does about health. He knows how to schedule a neurology consult. He knows the difference in MRI and a PET scan. He knows which surgeon to use to take your gallbladder out or remove your tumor. But ask about health, he'll have almost nothing. In fact, he'll make fun of your notions of health. So if you say something like, could you have a 25 hydroxyvitamin D blood level run for me? He'll say, you don't need that. Are you been consulting Dr. Google? Or he orders the wrong test because he doesn't really know what this is all about, or says really stupid things. Your level is 30. You're okay.
And I think I've been in functional medicine scene like in deeply in since 2007. And here we are, 2021. I'm like, why do people not know that vitamin D will help you not get the flu, will help with bones, with help with precancer, with help with everything? I mean, vitamin D is so necessary for so many things. And yet, like you said, the standard American care, the standard of care here is not to pay any attention to that. I don't know if I told you my fibroid story in our last call, because it wasn't really around doctors, it was more around the idea of wheat belly and grains and the effect on the body. I had fibroids for a long time. And I don't know if you know what's happened recently since you and I have had this conversation is I started a certification. I have an empowerment strategist certification, and I have been hooked up with naturopathic oncologists who use a terrain-based system. And the last part of the terrain is emotional and mental awareness, because the emotions, as we know in epigenetics, can create disease, can help proliferate disease. They also can. So I'm like dealing with cancer patients right now who've had cancer 3 times and have done all the other conventional things, but have realized that they've never dealt with their emotions or with their stress or their repression. So now I'm specializing in dealing with that kind of stuff. So when I went and I had fibroids, and I know that a lot of it was emotional and mental and emotional. And then there were other aspects of it. I actually think it would help protect me in ways. But I did a whole bunch of different kinds of healing, and I met with doctors, and I did the whole thing, and I listened to my body. And my body said at one point, after all kinds of things, and I even released one naturally by myself. Well, that did not help my hemoglobin because I lost a lot of blood. And when I finally ended up going to the doctor, and I went straight to the specialist to have uterine artery embolization. And it was funny because I didn't go through a gynecologist. I went straight to have the MRI, and I sat in the office and I realized, oh, I don't want her to go over the films with me. I don't need to see the MRI. Just yes, you'll do it, or no, you won't. So she comes in, and I had the tech tell her I don't want to go over them. Yes, you'll do it, or no, you won't. She came in, she's okay. Yeah, I'll do it, but it's not my first recommendation. And I said, okay. And she goes, my first recommendation is hysterectomy. And I had Dr. Jane Pence on the show 4 times when I started back in 2015. And we talked about the overprescription of hysterectomies and how it's not necessary. And again, these are fibroids. They're not. And I mentioned that I wanted to be open to pregnancy. And she still said to hysterectomy. And I literally felt like I was in the twilight zone. And I thought to myself, is this really happening to me? Are we really at this day and age, she's really telling me this? Because I had a 15% chance of it going sort of wrong. And Doug is in the corner, like freaking out, thinking I'm going to die. And calmly, I said to her, like she was nuts. I'm like, yeah, that's not going to happen. And then she sends me to the gynecologist as the backup plan in case something bad happens. And gynecologist, younger woman, lovely. But she looked at me and she goes, you make me nervous. And I said, I make you nervous because you think that something bad's going to happen. And she said, yeah. I said, well, how about, since it's only 15%, that means 85% chance that it's going to go well. So what happens if it just breaks down over time and it leaves my body naturally and nothing happens? And she goes, I said, that can happen, right? She goes, yes. I said, well, that's what's going to happen. And then I proceeded to have that happen. And when I got back, she said, whatever you want to do, here's a prescription for whatever you want. Like I'd convinced the gynecologist that I knew my body well enough, but through the whole process, because a client of mine said, well, I don't know if I believe your emotional stuff because you couldn't heal your fibroids. I said, that's fair. I said, but I think that the reason I was supposed to go through this is because otherwise I wouldn't step foot in a hospital for any reason. And the fact that in this day and age with what I know and who I am and how I do speak up for myself, I still had to argue with the doctor in the whole way through the procedure and after, argued with every single doctor. And not because, guys, I have witnesses. I wasn't a belligerent person. I was very calm the entire time. I had 2 witnesses the entire time. I basically said, I'm not staying the night. And they all said, well, you could die. I'm like, I'm not going to die. It's just like the scare tactics are criminal. They're criminal. And so I went through this process thinking, I'm glad I went through this because I needed to understand what normal person goes through when they go to the doctor. They give all their power away and they say, you tell me what to do. And the doctor decides to take a 15% chance of something going wrong, which by the way, I came up with like 5 different fixes. And I'm like, oh, because I'm a problem solver. I'm like, what if we do this? And what if we do this? And I got looks like, no. And I'm like, well, you're not a really good problem solver. Why do you only have one solution to something? Shouldn't there be multiple solutions to a problem? Like, this is science. We could break this down, but nobody wanted to listen to that. It's one solution. We take it out. We have surgery. I'm like, I'm not doing surgery. So, at the end of the day, while it was an interesting learning experience, I recorded a podcast about it. I've never shared it with anyone because I'm waiting for the time where I'm going to, I want people, especially women, to stop like when they scare you, there's a reason they're scaring you, because like you said, the doctor gets paid on the surgery. She gets paid on the procedure. And it's not I denied, and it's not about power control. It's about, does it feel right in my body? Dr. Northrup and I've talked about this 3 times on the show. It's about your intuition about what's right for you. And the doctor has information. You have your body. You make a combination, and you're the only person that gets to decide if your information resonates with my body. So, I know some people think, well, that's an arrogant blah, blah, blah. I don't care. It's my body. And I followed it the entire way in my intuition, and I came out fine. Everything worked out fine. Everything was great. So, but Undoctored, this book, so nobody said anything. You didn't get any retro from doctors. You weren't called a heretic. You weren't called an arrogant jerk. You weren't, none of that.
Not a whole lot, because my colleagues don't typically read books on health. They might read their little narrow area of, if they even read the signs. This is a big problem, JJ, and it's gotten worse as the mountain of evidence is coming out. Good evidence from a whole bunch of different directions. A lot of the practicing docs just don't have the time or motivation to keep up. And so in other words, if they finish their training, let's say in 1992, and it's been almost 30 years, they are profoundly behind the times. And so they, as you encountered, they very good at using scare tactics in my area. So one of the things I did over the years, we set up a CT heart scan device. This is back 25 years ago. But we set up a CT heart scan device so we could screen people for heart disease, silent heart disease. These are people like you and me going about your business. You get a score, a calcium score, because calcium comprises 20% of all atherosclerotic plaque volume. It's a way to track. So very easy. Maybe your score is, let's say, 300, which is an important score, but it does not mean you need a stent or a bypass. But so we were using it as a preventive tool, because if you do nothing, your score goes up 25% per year. And by the way, if you go on what the doctor calls optimal medical therapy, high dose statin cholesterol drug, aspirin, low fat diet, exercise program, it still goes up 25% per year. So what are my colleagues? They say, let's do the real test, because you know what? You could be a walking time bomb. I can't be responsible. What happens to you if you don't do this? So in other words, a heart catheterization, stent, bypass, preventive, which by the way is malpractice, but it's done all the time. The science does not support that. You do not benefit. If you have no symptoms, you ride your bike, you go for walks, nothing, and yet you have some measure of atherosclerosis. There is no study that shows you benefit. It's done all the time, JJ. That's just one field. It's done all the time in ophthalmology, in pulmonology, and any other procedural gastroenterology. It's hard to get anything out of a gastroenterologist's mouth besides you need an upper endoscopy and colonoscopy. And so that's the sad state of affairs in healthcare. It shouldn't be called health care because it has nothing to do with health. It's dispensing procedures and pharmaceuticals and other products for profit.
It's sick care. You only go when you're sick. And I was 22 maybe when I went so it dates back to before I was in functional medicine. I was 22, living in New York City, personal training. And I had a little pain in my knee. And I said, you don't need to, I knew it wasn't bone. Duh, it's a pain. And I didn't break anything. So I was like, I don't need to have x-rays. And again, I'm 22. And the guy's like, oh, I think you need some x-rays. I'm like, it's not bone. It's you either do an MRI or we look at what's going on with the structure of my joint. Maybe I twisted something. It's a sprain. I don't know, whatever. Anyway, he did 4 x-rays, cost me $400 or $500. And he's like, oh, there's nothing there. I'm like, I told you, I don't know what, And then I said, can I get a whole MRI of my whole body, my whole spine? I was learning about the spine, right? So I'm all about that time structural things with the facet joints and your vertebrae. And I'm like, can I get a whole MRI of my spine? He's like, no. And he said, would you do anything different if you did? And at the time, I was 22. I probably said no, but the reality of it, I would have. Had I known that I had a bulging disc, I probably would have done something different. I would have exercised differently. I would have looked at something differently. I would have done whatever I needed to do to fix it or correct it or acknowledge that it was there. And that's always been my sort of preventative mindset of, and I don't do it in all the other ways. Like I'm not as good at it financially. I'm not good with it with my car or with certain like my pipes or my house, but with my body. Oh, if you know that it's coming, if you know the effects of aging are this, and this, the effects of toxicity in your environment are this, and this, why wouldn't you why wouldn't you clean yourself out every so often? Why wouldn't you get ahead of it to know that you can stop these things before they happen, because they don't happen overnight? So when you're looking at Undoctored and all the good reasons why everyone that you just shouldn't blatantly, blindly trust your doctor. Like you talked about type 2 diabetes in this book being the perfect disease. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Well, any disease that goes on for a long time. It's a bad disease for healthcare? Pneumonia or falling down the stairs. In other words, an injury that has only a limited opportunity for revenue producing activity or products. So that's why Big Pharma is not that interested in antibiotics. They're not that interested in short-term administration of a drug. Big Pharma, healthcare, medical device industry are interested in long-term, even better, lifelong conditions like high blood pressure, high cholesterol. It's a complete waste of time. Skin rashes, ulcerative colitis, psoriasis, migraine headaches. They want things that don't go away and persist for a long, long, long time. In other words, it's the difference between maybe 2 weeks of opportunity versus 40 years of opportunity. And so that's why they focus on these so-called diseases of lifestyle. And by the way, so there's a very basic observation that I think tells a lot of the story. If we look at people, indigenous populations like the Yanomami in the Brazilian rainforest and the Matsas in the highlands of Peru, the Hadza in the savannas of Tanzania, or the Maasai in the savannah of Kenya, or the Malawi on the east coast of Africa. These are people who don't take antibiotics, don't have laxatives, don't have glyphosate in their food, don't have herbicide, pesticide exposures, and they have no coronary disease, stroke, colon cancer, hemorrhoids, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, hypertension, high cholesterol. They have none of that stuff. They have other problems. They got dengue fever, malaria, and injury, and worm infestations. The stuff that modern healthcare is good at, infection and injury. Modern healthcare sucks for long-term chronic disease because they don't want to get rid of long-term chronic. It's too profitable. But there's not that observation that indigenous populations who live differently than we do don't have our disease. So there's a very important bunch of lessons to learn from that.
So let's continue about the lessons to learn from the fact that they don't have our literally lifestyle-based diseases.
JJ, so the great thing about this, so this kind of conversation pisses off a lot of people, it pisses us off. But the truth of it is, the positive spin on this, the information we now have is so powerful to show people how to regain health that you don't have to have coronary disease, hypertension, all that kind of stuff. But it means addressing the common factors that allow those diseases to emerge. People get confused by that because they come to me and say, hey, my niece has a glioblastoma. Do you have an alternative treatment for that? And I'll say, no. Or this is not a compendium of alternative treatments. That's how they think in medicine, right? In healthcare. What I think a better way to think about health is to address the factors that commonly lead to these diseases. Like, as you point out, deficiency of vitamin D, because we wear clothes and we spend a lot of our lives indoors. And as we age beyond 40, we lose a lot of the ability to activate vitamin D. We drink filtered water, which removes all magnesium. So we got to add back magnesium. So it preserves bone health, reduces blood pressure, helps your sleep, reduces heart rhythm disorders. One of the things I've been spending a lot of time doing lately is restoring the microbiome, the intestinal, because we have massively screwed up our microbiome. I used to think, for instance, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, SIBO, I used to think it was rare. That is a situation where unhealthy bacterial species like E. coli and Klebsiella, these are pathogenic species in the stool, have proliferated and then outmuscled healthy species and then ascended up into the ileum, jejunum, duodenum, and stomach. Essentially 30 feet of unhealthy microbes. They live only hours to days. So there's very rapid turnover, trillions of bacteria. When they die, a lot of their byproducts enter the bloodstream. That's a very, very important, relatively recently discovered phenomenon called endotoxemia. Well, now the tools are getting, the information and the tools available to your listeners has gotten a lot better. For instance, do I have my, here, the air device. Little device, you blow into it, and then it registers on your smartphone how much hydrogen gas you're producing. It tells you where microbes are in the GI tract. So this is, the air device is for, oh, you have one?
After our last conversation, I bought this. Is that what this is?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. I haven't used it yet, but I bought it and I was all gung ho. I've been fasting a lot more recently. So in terms of gut replenishment and between bone broth and water fasting. And, but I do want it. I guess it's a tech part, putting it on my iPad. I don't have a smartphone. So but I absolutely wanted to use it, but I wanted to show you as soon as you talked about it, I bought a lot of things to make the yogurt. I bought multiple yogurt things and I am making my own yogurt, but anyway, I digress. So you talked about the tools that we have to be able to test ourselves, to test our own bodies that cost, hundreds of dollars versus thousands of, and then you don't have to rely on somebody else to keep doing it for you. You can keep retesting, right?
Yes. And you know what? Even if you went to the doctor, the primary care doctor or the gastroenterologist, and you said, hey, I think I have SIBO. It's just, why do you think that? And you say, well, because I have fibromyalgia, which is essentially synonymous with SIBO. Or you have irritable bowel syndrome, also nearly synonymous with SIBO. Or you have an autoimmune disease, or maybe you were diagnosed with early Parkinson's disease, or you're a type 2 diabetic, or you're overweight. All those conditions, fatty liver, very high likelihood of SIBO, between 50 and 100%.
Can we define SIBO and tell me the difference between SIBO and leaky gut?
So in SIBO, where you have 30 feet of unhealthy microbes, typically the so-called gram-negative species like E. coli or Klebsiella, sometimes the gram-positive species like Staphylococcus and Streptococcus and Enterococcus. So that's why SIBO can present differently, because the species that have proliferated can vary, but they proliferate. And then the small bowel, so the colon has a very vigorous 2-layer mucus barrier. Because that's where all the poop and microbes are supposed to be. But as you go up the small bowel, it's a very fragile single-layer mucus barrier, very thin, less than a millimeter thick. And so when you have unhealthy microbes that have proliferated in the small bowel, they are able to breach through the intestinal wall, both breakdown products, endotoxemia, but it's also becoming clear that the small bowel becomes almost porous to the microbes themselves. And so that's why now, with better techniques like DNA analysis, many of the microbiology researchers have uncovered microbes in the brain, in the breast tissue, in the uterus, in the placenta, in a pregnant mom, in the prostate, in the gallstones. Now think about gallstones for a second. When you take gallstones out and you examine them for DNA, microbial DNA, you find tons of them. Now, wait a minute, how'd that happen? If stool microbes are in the colon and the duct, the bile duct that connects to the duodenum is 24 feet above the colon, how did stool microbes get into the gallbladder? SIBO. And so these observations, JJ, are causing all of health to be reconsidered, redefined, because it's becoming clear. For instance, if you have atrial fibrillation or any kind of cancer or any kind of many gynecologic issues, migraine, headache, rosacea, you must reconsider it in light of a disrupted microbiome. And so the air device is the game changer. I have no relationship with them, so I know the guy. I know their inventor, Dr. Angus Short in Dublin, Ireland. Nice guy. But this is the game changer for intestinal health. Just as blood sugar, finger stick blood sugars, was a game changer for diabetics. When I was in medical school many years ago, there was a faculty member. So before there were finger stick glucose checks, she was about 28 years old, and she was already blind, in kidney failure, and had an amputation, because they didn't have finger stick glucose to check they had to do urine dipsticks. And of course, when you're blind, imagine that, right? You can't even see the damn dipstick. And so it was if you have a 2-year-old running around outside and she passes out, loses consciousness, is her blood sugar 900 and she's going into diabetic ketoacidosis and shock? Or is it 30 and she's going to die of irreversible brain damage in the next 3 minutes? Dip the urine? Yeah, fat chance, right? So in other words, finger stick blood glucose that came out in the mid 1980s was a game changer. Diabetes is still a big problem, but it made it a much better manageable condition. That's what this is for intestinal health. It makes intestinal health. Now, the problem is the instructions provided don't really tell you how to use it. So I have it in my Wheat Belly blog, the real instructions on how to use it, because the inventor, great guy, he's an engineer. He's not a doc. He's not a gastroenterologist. He thought it was a device just to navigate FODMAPs intolerance, and it's not that. It's that and all other food intolerances, by the way, histamine, FODMAPs, nuts, soy. You can test it and find out if the real cause is not the food. The real cause is the disrupted microbiome, especially SIBO. And with the tools, JJ, that's the great thing. The tools. I'm having some yogurt made from Lactobacillus brevis, because I was thinking about this one. There's so many fascinating things you could do with the microbiome. So this species, Lactobacillus brevis, is often you can find it in kimchi, you can get it in fermented sauerkraut and some fermented meats, traditionally fermented meats. I got the microbe itself and made yogurt. It's not yogurt from the store. Yogurt from the store is garbage. It's fermented for 4 hours. Microbes don't have mommies and daddies, right? They don't have sexual reproduction. They have asexual reproduction. One bacteria becomes two becomes four. Well, most microbes, like this one here, doubles every 2 hours. My favorite microbe in the world, Lactobacillus rhodori, doubles every 3 hours. But the brevis doubles every 2 hours, meaning if you ferment it commercially for 4 hours, you've allowed 2 doublings. If you allow it to ferment for 24 hours, in this case, 12 doublings, that's where you get numbers like 200 to 300 billion counts of and you get much bigger effects. This microbe reduces colitis, kills off cancer cells in the colon, it blocks weight gain, it achieves metabolic benefit. It can, what really interests me is there's a nootropic, that is something that makes you transiently smarter. Doesn't make your brain healthier necessarily, but it makes you transiently smarter, more creative, better able to put 2 and 2 together, draw from memory, learn new things. This nootropic is called phenylethylamine, or PEA, not to be confused with palmitoyl ethanolamide, PEA, the endocannabinoid. That's something different. But this phenylethylamine, it makes you smarter for a few hours and makes you happier. So you eat this yogurt and this microbe produces phenylethylamine, and I believe, anecdotally, it makes people just a little bit happier and a little bit smarter temporarily. And by the way, it also increases BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, at least in an experimental model. That's one of the keys to preservation of brain health. So it's a nootropic, and it's also neurotrophic. It makes your brain a little bit healthier, probably based on the preliminary evidence. But that's the power now of the things we're capable of doing in the microbiome.
Okay, 3 questions. First, I don't know that I heard the answer. And maybe you said it and I didn't hear it. The difference between SIBO and leaky gut.
Oh, yes. So when you have the proliferation of unhealthy species in the small bowel, so the small bowel is more permeable, but also the presence of those microbes is very destructive to the intestinal mucus lining as well as the intestinal cellular lining. And so it gives greater access of the breakdown products of bacteria, endotoxemia. And so that's leaky gut. Endotoxemia is kind of the more formal name for it. If you were to measure it, it's not clinically available, but I hope it will in the future. You could measure an increase in the level of what's called LPS, or lipopolysaccharide, as well as teichoic acid. These are breakdown products of bacteria that get into the break through the intestinal wall, get into the bloodstream. Leaky gut. And
so we're talking about a specific part of the colon versus the intestines. And what with SIBO, it's about it travels up. Like, tell me, because I'm still unclear on how we would be able to determine the difference. Is it just this device? I just had a case study last night with my trainers, and she she's very reactive to all foods. And she's on many medications. She's had the lap band. She drinks too much. And I said, and she was talking about, they're like, oh, we'll replace this. I'm like, no, you have leaky gut. And if she doesn't have leaky gut, she has SIBO. She's got something very digestively off. And I said, so we can start there, besides the emotional things that are huge and really the determining factors of whether she's going to be happy or not. But so how would one test if they have SIBO versus leaky gut?
If you have SIBO, you have leaky gut.
Right. But if you have leaky gut, you don't necessarily have SIBO, right?
Right. Because back to my other favorite topic to talk about, modern wheat. So one of the components of modern wheat is an altered form of the gliadin protein. And we know with good science, the gliadin protein also opens the door to leaky gut. That's good information. We know that with confidence. Now, here's a lethal combination: consumption of wheat and thereby the gliadin protein with SIBO. That's a really, really big, because both those things open the door for intestinal permeability, and endotoxemia is much worse. Those are the people who have all those food intolerances. They have fibromyalgia, they have irritable bowel syndrome, diarrhea, often have one or more autoimmune diseases. They have cognitive problems. So that's a really bad combination. But what this thing does, and by the way, there's a new version of it coming out in a couple of weeks or so, maybe a few weeks, that also measures methane. They originally intended to also have it measure hydrogen sulfide, but it sounds like it won't be capable of doing that. But the more gases we can measure, the more we identify different species. But what this really does, JJ, is it sounds out how high up bacteria have gone. So if I take, let's say, a prebiotic fiber, let's say a couple teaspoons of inulin or raw potato starch, these are prebiotic fibers that bacteria like to eat. You can't digest them. You can ingest them, but you can't break them down. You can't digest them, but bacteria can. So normally I would take, let's say, 2 teaspoons of inulin, do a baseline that's real low, 0 to 10 scale, by the way, and a rise of 4 is abnormal from baseline. So let's say I test baseline on 1.2. Low. Okay, good. I take my 2 teaspoons of inulin, maybe stir it into my coffee. 90 to 180 minutes later, it should be positive, like a 10, because that's when the inulin gets to the colon, where the microbes are supposed to be. But if you turn positive, say in 30 minutes, 45 minutes, 60 minutes, up to 90 minutes, that means the bacteria are up high, because you can't get something here ingested to get 24 feet down to your colon. You can't do that in 30 minutes. It takes a minimum of 90 minutes to do that. So what it really is a way to map out where the bacteria are.
Okay. And so is this a way to see if someone has SIBO?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
The problem is it doesn't identify all forms of SIBO. It identifies some of the common forms. But if you have SIBO because of proliferation, say, of methanogenic species, methane producers, like Methanobrevibacter smithii, these are wacky names. I don't make this stuff up. It won't identify that form. Or if you have fungal overgrowth, like Candida glabrata or Candida tropicalis or Candida albicans, it won't, or Malassezia, it won't identify that either. And if you have a hydrogen sulfide producer like desulfovibrio, it won't identify that. But it's still helpful because it does identify the most common forms of SIBO. And it gives you, if you have fibromyalgia, you test now you know your fibromyalgia has nothing to do with muscle and bone. No. It originates in the gut.
I would say, I think that most of our issues are, well, it's funny because Dr. Nasha, when she first came on the show and I had her say, what do you think is emotional? And she wrote The Metabolic Approach to Cancer, emotional, environmental, and what was the other thing? Emotional, and then like food, besides environmental. And that might've been, and she said 30, 30, and 30. Now she's a Libra, so she gave me that answer, but like 30, 30, 30. And I would say, any of these what the diseases that we're talking about or the issues we're talking about, like fibromyalgia, I absolutely gut, like 50% gut, but I'm on the other side saying, especially since I've been talking about this for 20 years, it's 50% emotional too, in terms of like people's repressed crap that they've got going on. I see it in their energetic. I see it. It's so clear to me. It's the one area that no one wants to deal with. It's the most overlooked part of health because it's hard. It's painful. It brings up things people don't like. But the other half, where to start, is absolutely the gut. And I can't wait to have that conversation when your new book comes out. Which we will, because you'll come back on and we'll talk about your new book. But I want to go back to Undoctored in terms of looking at, and again, yeah, I agree. You've had this conversation many times and you've been talking about this for many years. So please read the book, get the book, because listen to the book. You'll get pissed off and hopefully enough that you'll want to do something about it if you aren't already. So let's talk about, obviously, looking at the microbiome and getting devices and ways to test yourself and changing your diet. Obviously, like that's like one of the biggest things that your platform even started on with Wheat Belly. It was like Wheat Belly to like reducing grains and wheat for sure to help with blood pressure and cardiovascular issues. Like who made that leap, right? And cholesterol and the myth of cholesterol with saturated fat. And I love how you go in the book and talk about, again, this is just common sense. Diabetes, type 2 diabetes. All right. What do we know about it? We know about that you can't digest carbohydrates. And then of course, but what does the ADA say? Oh, do a low fat, low sugar diet, but eat your grains, eat your carbohydrates. And it's like, oh my God, why are we not questioning that? It's so stupid. Anyway, I could go off. I want to be positive. So let's talk about other ways in Undoctored that you help people, because I want every single person to own this book. And I know there's the 6 steps to seizing control over your health, and I don't need you to reread what's in the book, but let's go over some of the newer things. You just went over the Air device, which is probably not in Undoctored, is it?
No, too recent.
Okay. So what other things, and I love in the book, which is why I finally had to just order the hard copy too, because you mention some of the, let's call them checklists or checks and balances in the works of people who are researching just what you said, like testing areas of the population where there is a lot of healthcare and there's no less mortality and there's no less sort of like healing. And then the places in the population that have less healthcare and like the people that are watching those kinds of things and reporting those kinds of things. Cause you mentioned having hope in the book about, although in today's day and age, what can we do? So what can we do? How do you feel that we as people who are awake, aware, and empowered can help make a difference right now with what's going on?
Well, it really does, starting with what you have already done. That is recognizing that the doctor is not your friend. The doctor is about profit. It's churning you and your insurance for revenue. This is actually talked about. I was in healthcare for many, many years. I wish I didn't have to say this, but when you're an healthcare insider for many years, including board meetings and those kinds of things, the conversation is not about making health better. It's about how do we increase revenue for our cardiovascular program by 18% this year? That's what it's about. So accept that the doctor is not there to help you become healthy. In fact, his or her job is often to do the opposite. Because if you go through procedures, as you know, they're not always safe. Give it a drug. The drugs have all kinds of unforeseen consequences, even something that seems benign, like let's say Pepsid or ranitidine or Prilosec. Those are very destructive to health. But the doctor will say, oh, they're so benign. Take it for 30 years if you want, which guarantees major problems in health. So that's step 1. And then step 2, recognize people often think that the list of strategies and supplements in Undoctored and Wheat Belly on my programs are haphazard, just slap. They're not. They're there for very good reason. So the nutrients that we mentioned earlier are lacking because of the way we conduct our lives now. You can't drink water from a river or stream. It's got sewage in it. It's got pesticide, herbicide residues and other garbage. We have to filter it. Water filtration removes all magnesium. Iodine deficiency has been a problem all throughout human history. If you look at Greek statues, Roman statues, Egyptian statues, you'll see a good number of them have goiters and large thyroid glands. This was a huge problem all throughout human history. It was recognized that it was due to lack of iodine because we didn't eat the thyroid glands of animals, or we were living internally, not coastally, because iodine's all in the ocean, most in the ocean. And so goiters were a big problem. It was recognized as lack of iodine. FDA says put iodine in salt, use a lot of salt. Well, coincident with that advice was cut your fat, eat more healthy whole grains. That causes insulin resistance and sodium retention. The problem wasn't salt. The problem was the diet. So now a lot of people cut back on salt. Goiters, hypothyroidism is coming back. So we replace iodine. So simple. It might cost you $3 a year to do that. We do use fish oil because, we're supposed to eat the brains of the animals we kill. We're supposed to eat the heart and the liver and the intestinal tract of the animals we kill. Nobody does that anymore. Or most do not. That's how we got omega-3s, as well as fish and shellfish. And now modern fish and shellfish are toxic. You get mercury toxicity if you eat fish more than a couple times a week. If you eat shellfish, you get cadmium toxicity. And these heavy metal levels are cumulative. They stack up over time. And so we can't have free reign to eat all the fish and shellfish we want. So we got to take fish off. Now, the collection of nutrients that I put together, when you put them together, you also get a reduction in insulin resistance. That is the brain, liver, other organs, muscle, unresponsive to insulin that causes your pancreas to produce huge levels of insulin that causes weight gain, visceral fat, the belly fat, causes high blood pressure, prediabetes, diabetes, coronary disease, Alzheimer's, cancers. So that collection of nutrients, especially coupled with the diet, cutting out the amylopectin A of wheat and grains and the gliadin-derived opioid peptides that drive appetite, take all that, and insulin resistance drops. People lose weight, their blood pressure normalizes. The real cause of coronary disease, an excess of small LDL particles, excess triglycerides as VLDL particles, inflammation, that all recedes. In other words, you regain health, no drugs required. Now, what led me down the microbiome path was we were using, I told everybody, get a high potency multi-species probiotic. Make sure you get prebiotic fibers, polysaccharides, polyphenols from your diet, and include some fermented foods. But it became clear that's not enough. You got to go further. And so some of the ideas have been refined since. So with our choices in probiotics now, we try to steer people towards probiotics that have what are called keystone species, very, very important foundational species like Lactobacillus gasseri, Lactobacillus reuteri, Lactobacillus rhamnosus, and plantarum. So there's some others, Akkermansia. You get these, and it starts to rebuild your microbiome for you. It's also become clear that fermented foods are much underappreciated. They really are powerful. And that's what this is, a form of a fermented food, this Lactobacillus brevis that you ordinarily would get from kimchi, sauerkraut, and fermented meats. But put it all together, JJ, and you get an extremely powerful tool to not have type 2 diabetes, to not have coronary disease, to not have atrial fibrillation, to not have osteoporosis, and on and on and on. Yet the doctor has a long list of medicines he'd like you to take for those conditions.
I know that, and again, I'm not speaking to these people on my podcast. Those of you that have found this through YouTube, I don't know you. And I don't know what you're about, but if you're searching Dr. William Davis, you're probably part of the tribe, I'm guessing. But one of the things that I know, I hear my parents in the back of my head say, "Oh, but my doctor's so nice and they like me a lot and they seem very kind." And the doctors that they work with believe the information. They stand behind what they're saying. They don't question it, which is part of the problem. They don't question it. They don't look for solutions. They're not asking, how did you get this? As a personal trainer, I would always come from the place of, well, when we're looking at like joints and I ended up being the person who worked with people with 7 and 10 injuries because no one else knew what to do with them when it looked at applying force and resistance to motion without having to go against the body structure, looking at the anatomy and how the joint structure and function operates in the body and the cues that things you're really not supposed to do because you pinch a nerve or you're not really built to move that way, things you shouldn't be doing. So I've always asked that question, well, why did this start in the first place? Because if we figure out why it started in the first place, then we won't have to repeat it. But we're such a society of Band-Aids, of give me the pill. I don't want to change my diet. I don't want to change my lifestyle, or I don't want to have to think about it. I just want to go to my doctor and they just tell me what to do. And so for those people, and I don't mean this in a mean way, when you're not really curious and you're not really asking questions, I don't got any compassion for what happens when you don't like take stock in and get curious about your contribution to your health. But it's for the people who are a little bit more, and I know I'm speaking to this on the show, the ones that take responsibility, that say, I want to learn more. I don't want to blindly trust anybody. And I do trust my intuition. So looking at things like the microbiome, or, that's why at the beginning of the show, I said to people, please don't share this with people that aren't interested, because my parents love their doctors, their dentists, their whoever, like they trust them. They're not looking to go against them. They're not looking to, and it's not that they're bad people. They just are indoctrinated and brainwashed by the powers that be. Their training comes from people that own pharmaceutical companies and have a vested interest in the financial plan that they have going on. And it's just part of the system. And a lot of people don't want to rock the boat. I'm a boat rocker. But I've been quiet during this time. Really, I'll be honest. I've been quiet because I also want to bring you, as you said too, it's not about being on stage. It's not about being in the media. It's about the information. And it's about the information that is, we both see, which is why you started this, unnecessarily suffering, death, disease, just things that don't need to happen if you give people the right information. And again, at the end of the day, the people choose their path. And if you're not interested in learning or asking questions, you feel like, I know for my mother, years ago, when I started with the functional medicine clinic, I wanted her to get her blood work done. And I wanted her to have a more comprehensive metabolic panel. I asked for B12. I asked for iron. I asked for ferritin. I asked for vitamin D. I asked for T3, T4. I asked for TSH. I asked for estrogen and progesterone. I asked for cortisol. I asked DHEA. I mean, it wasn't like off the charts, but her doctor said no. And I said, what? And she said, yeah. She said, no, I don't need to, because she knows what it says. And I'm like, oh my God, I would have punched the woman in the face had I been standing there. Are you kidding me? No, you don't know what it is. What you know is you think it's getting less, that it's low every year. And that would be true. But you're not even giving my mother the option of seeing if she wants to do anything about it. Like, you literally have taken away her. And now she didn't challenge her. That's my mom. She wasn't going to challenge the doctor, but I just thought, oh, the arrogance of that. You're the patient. If I want blood work, I got used to finding doctors to work with. Now I just bypass that and go to a life extension. I just go I don't even deal with the doctors, go to life extension, get my blood work. And then I'm around enough doctors and physicians and naturopaths. If I have a question, I say, hey, can you look at my blood work? But otherwise I'm that person too with you. And so I just really want people to take this conversation, buy the book, please buy Undoctored, buy several copies of it, give it to people who actually are looking, and make sure that they know they have choice, that they can transform their health. They can prevent disease by doing some really simple things. And it has to do with diet and lifestyle. And you have a resource within Dr. Davis and all the work that he does, all his blogs, all his videos, everything that he has to support that. I've got some of that, but go to him. And why do I trust him over a different doctor? Because he's speaking language I understand. He's questioning the narrative. He's questioning that he found this by accident, if you will, right? You're trying to help patients and, oh my God, look at this. Like, you weren't in this. You put yourself at risk. Dr. Northrup and I had a conversation, our third interview recently. And she said, all the doctors that are being blacklisted because they have everything to lose and nothing to gain. And it's like, really, because it's the unpopular opinion. You're going against big pharma. You're speaking out when the media has been paid to push propaganda down your throat, to convince you of things and to be afraid of things that you don't need to be afraid of. And so that's why I thought to myself, I don't think you could have published this book now. This book would have been taken right off. You would have been banned from selling this book at today's day and age. So I'm glad that you did it in Absolutely true. Questioning doctors right now. Oh, no. Questioning big pharma, letting people know that they don't have their best interest at heart. And it's all about money, that healthcare is a business. Healthcare is a business. I'd like you all to think of healthcare like your used car salesman. Don't trust them when you walk in, because you have that attitude about a car salesman. So have the same, and no disrespect to the car salesman, because I'm sure a lot of you are very nice, but take that same attitude with Western medicine. And with just everything. Don't trust anybody, not from a scarcity position, just from I'm going to take your guidance and I'm going to consider it. I'm going to research it. I'm going to be with it. I'm going to ask more questions. And then you, the individual, ultimately are the only one responsible for your health, period. And I hope that you will use Dr. Davis as a resource To get more information, please read his books. He's going to be coming out with another book. Let's talk about that briefly, and hopefully he'll come back on and we'll talk about that book when I'd like to help you in the launch so that people will buy it when it's out. So tell me about this new book about the microbiome.
I appreciate that, JJ. So it's a continuation of the conversation started in books like Wheat Belly and Undoctored, but really expanding the microbiome conversation. It talks a lot about SIBO and how to eradicate it. I think I have a yogurt that gets rid of SIBO, preliminary. But so if you take a probiotic, a commercial probiotic, how are they created? Well, they're just kind of haphazard slapdash collections of microbes. They'll say, okay, we think that Lactobacillus lactis is good for you. Let's throw some of that in. We think that Bifidobacterial bifidum is good for you. Let's throw some of that in. It's not intended for a specific purpose, just general health. So you take a commercial probiotic, you may have paid a lot of money for it too. And if you have SIBO, maybe it's expressed as fibromyalgia or depression or anxiety or migraine headaches or rheumatoid arthritis or IBS or diabetes or fat liver. You take that probiotic, do those conditions go away? Does the SIBO go away? Does the intestinal leak go away? No. It might get a little bit better. You might have a little less bloating, a little less gas, but it doesn't go away. So I asked a different question. I asked, what if we chose microbes that take up residence in the upper GI tract? That's where SIBO occurs. And we choose microbes that produce what are called bacteriocins. These are natural antibiotics effective against the species of SIBO, like E. coli. So I put together three: a strain of Lactobacillus gasseri, two strains of Lactobacillus reuteri, and a strain of Bacillus coagulans. We make yogurt out of it just like that. We ferment for 36 hours, so we get really high bacterial counts, and we consume it, and then we track H2 afterwards down the road. And it's normalized about 90% of people with their hydrogen gas. You also have the option of herbal antibiotics, which I was very skeptical about, but they do work, and there's published evidence to show they work. There's also the conventional antibiotic rifaximin. So there's a lot of talk about SIBO, how to recognize it, telltale signs, how to test with the air device the right way, when you should say, some conditions are so synonymous with SIBO, like fibromyalgia and IBS, that you could say, well, I'm just going to go ahead and assume I have SIBO. A lot of people do that and have a lot of great success. How to recognize fungal overgrowth, how to recognize methanogenic overgrowth, how to use the yogurts to get incredible effects. So I think I told you last time about Lactobacillus reuteri, microbe lost by 96% of Americans, and responsible, when present, for causing release of oxytocin from the brain. So think about that. We have a time of record, put aside pandemic, record social isolation, record divorce, record suicide, and almost lost this microbe responsible for oxytocin. So we make yogurt, we ferment for 36 hours, in the presence of prebiotic fibers. We've done flow cytometry numerous times on the yogurt. We get about 260 billion bacteria per half cup serving. You eat it, and you have a flood of empathy, of liking your partner and your coworkers better, of getting rid of social anxiety. People introduce themselves as strangers. And you get a restoration of youthful muscle and strength, because we lose that as we age. It comes back. Your immune response is much amplified. Sleep is much deeper. You have vivid, childlike dreams. Bone density is preserved. In other words, you have a restoration of many youthful characteristics. The thing that really drives excitement, though, is it also increases dermal collagen dramatically. And so ladies notice they start losing their wrinkles after about 4 to 8 weeks. And it tastes fine. It tastes like yogurt. It's not yogurt. People say, well, can I just buy Faye or Chobani? No. One, they use ho-hum microbes that don't really do very much. And two, like we talked about, they only ferment for 4 hours. That's why you'll see gellan gum, xanthan gum, guar gum, thickeners added, because there's almost no microbes. So, but you can make these kinds, and there's other things they talk about, ways to restore the mucus barrier. We have something called clove green tea, which is extremely effective for increasing the mucus barrier. So it's very soothing to people who are dealing with IBS, recovering from IBS or ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease or celiac disease.
Okay. I thought about this earlier and I didn't ask it. So I'm going to wrap up with this last question, and it's probably like a little bit left of center, but it's about what you're talking about in terms of the microbiome. So I have a cat and I have 4 cats, and I feed them like the best food on the planet, Dr. Marty's. Like I could eat this food. It's chicken liver. It's all the things. It's all the things. So the only tocopherols are the preservative in it, right? But it's freeze dried raw food. And it's just like the best. And I have a cat who she's been having blood in her mucus in her stool for a while. And back when I took her to the vet years ago for something else, they're like, well, that happens sometimes. Okay. Well, it's been happening for years. And I think that and I just have this intuition, there's something going on that's been going on, and it doesn't happen every time, but now she's starting to have and I've only switched the food in the last 6 months. She's had like a thicker mucus on her stool. So there's thick mucus in the front end, and then there's blood on the back end. And then she had some grass yesterday and she threw up, and there was a little tiny drop of blood in the throw up. So I know that there's something in the chain there. If I was to, I'm going to still, and the thing is, the reason I'm asking you is because I know if I take her to a vet, they're not going to be able to do anything. Like, what are they going to do? Right. I don't know I'm going to run blood because I definitely want to see what else is possibly going. But besides blood work and just palpation, what is a vet going to do for me to help me with some kind of stomach or intestinal issue with my cat? I mean, mine is a parasite or worms, and I'll take the stool sample with me. But what could I give her right now to help sort of correct some of the stuff that might be going on in her gut?
I don't know.
Okay. Well, I was thinking of, like, you mentioned the clove. What was that? Clove tea or clove
green tea.
Okay. Well, she does tinctures very well. And if that's something that can help reorganize her microbiome, I do give them probiotics. Not every day. I've used grape seed extract oil to help with the removal of possible intestinal parasites. So I've got 2 kinds of probiotics, Dr. Marty's, and then not a really good one, one that's Purina, but I use it because of the taste, because I want to mask some of the stuff I'm putting there. I give them charcoal. I've got charcoal in their wet food right now, just little bits to help to take some, to help eliminate anything else that's going on in there. So I just wondered if there was any other human thing I could give them. I mean, would a yogurt?
JJ. Yeah, nope. They're not fuzzy humans. They have different problems. So I won't pretend to be an expert.
All right. All right. Well, I just thought, I'm going to still, I have pet people, animal communicators and healers and things, and I'll go that route. But I just thought what you're talking about in humans sounds very similar to what she's going through. And in that world, there are not a lot of, I'm not going to get her to breathe into one of these, right? So how else am I going to test her right now? And I know that most regular veterinarians don't have those kinds of tools to do those kind of deep dives unless there's something really wrong and they're like opening her up to, do some surgery or something and do exploratory looking around, which I don't want to do. So, all right.
The vets have the same problem that conventional MDs have, which is they're bent on procedures and drugs and know almost nothing about health or diet. But, I know sometimes that's another point. Sometimes you do need the doctor or the vet. If something bad happens to you, you fall off, you fall down the stairs, you have a car accident, or your cat ate something outside that had a worm in it. There are times when we need but they don't admit that what they're really good at is acute and catastrophic care. They're terrible at common chronic conditions.
Yep.
By the way, the reason why the clove green tea works so well is it's just drawn from some basic science. The cloves are a source of something called eugenol, which is a terpene that thickens the mucus barrier in the intestine dramatically by causing proliferation of some healthy species of Clostridia. The green tea catechins, like epigallocatechin, cross-link the mucin proteins in intestinal mucus and makes the mucus barrier, converts it from a semi-liquid to a semi-gel, much more protective and reducing endotoxemia or gut leak. And then lastly, we add fructooligosaccharides, FOS, the prebiotic fiber, because that is a very specific bloomer of a species called Akkermansia, which is a keystone species that protects your mucus barrier. Provided you're not on a ketogenic diet, in which case the opposite happens. That's a whole other conversation. And so this clove green tea we make with those 3 things is wonderfully soothing, and it's part of an effort to restore order in your microbiome.
So do you think that would have any negative effect on a cat if I was to try it?
I don't know.
Okay, that's fine. That's fair. That's fair. All right. And then the next question is, is there a recipe on your blog for this?
No.
You buy it?
No, you make it. It's
You
a
make it.
tablespoon of cloves.
Oh.
You boil it for like 10 minutes. You use a green tea. Trader Joe's, by the way, I have no relationship with Trader Joe's, but they have a very catechin-rich green tea, organic green tea. Brew it for a couple of minutes as you ordinarily would, and then a teaspoon of FOS. And use
What's FOS? Oh, of the
fructose oligosaccharide.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and that you said it, but it has a different effect because I am on a ketogenic. I do a lot of fast. I mean, I'm more paleo right now, but I do go between paleo and keto and fasting. So tell me, what's the difference if you're on a ketogenic diet?
So ketogenic diet might be also called like a no carb or low carb diet, right? And so when you don't feed microbes, because they need those prebiotic fibers, polyphenols, polysaccharides, like the stuff in asparagus or onions or garlic. So a lot of ketogenic people, some people on a ketogenic diet are aware of this and do it well and do it right. But if you're not, and you don't take in those sources of prebiotic fibers to nourish microbes, many healthy species are diminished. But there's an odd change in some species, such as Akkermansia. So Akkermansia loves FOS and prebiotic fibers, but if you deprive it, other microbes die off or diminish. Akkermansia flourishes. And the reason for that, the full name for Akkermansia is Akkermansia muciniphila, mucus lover. It has the added capacity to feed on human mucus. And so it starts to digest your intestinal mucus barrier. You get colitis, you get increased gut leak or endotoxemia, long-term potential for diverticular disease, colon cancer. But so one of the things is, here's the irony. In a lot of dietary questions, we don't have good science. It's not funded well. In the ketogenic diet, we have some pretty good science. And the reason for that is that the ketogenic diet goes back a century, as you may have heard this, as a treatment for intractable grand mal seizures in children. And it works, reduces seizure frequency by 50%. This is a very bad situation. These kids have brain damage. It's irreversible if they keep on seizing all through the day. So a ketogenic diet reduces seizure frequency by about 50%. But what happens to those kids put on a ketogenic diet? They stop growing. They start to get constipated. They develop kidney stone. Kids don't develop kidney stones, but these kids do. 8% of them develop kidney stones, fatty liver. They start to develop metabolic distortions, like a rise in triglycerides, rise in blood sugar, insulin resistance. They develop osteopenia. These are kids.
But is this them doing it incorrectly, like not having the garlic and the onions and the asparagus and the prebiotics that we need? Is this them doing it? Because how somebody does something, they could do it in a way that negates, again, it's not balanced.
Right. So they're failing to take in prebiotic fibers and related nutrients. And in the beginning, they really did it bad because they used corn oil to up the fat intake. But more recently, they're using things like coconut oil, olive oil, MCT oils, but they're still seeing all these problems develop. So being ketotic as a near-term strategy is very effective. That's what lulls people. They think, wow, I'm doing a ketogenic diet. I'm losing weight. My triglycerides have dropped. My blood pressure's dropped. My blood sugar's dropped. My waist is smaller. But then it varies, but 12 months, 15 months, 18 months, 2 years into it, that's when the problems start to crop up. That's when you get the constipation, the reversal of metabolic benefits, weight regain, fatty liver, osteopenia, occasional sudden cardiac death. In other words, bad stuff happens long term. I'm waiting for the uptick in colon cancer as well as diverticular disease that's going to come in the years in the future, as many people do stay ketotic too long. So as long as you're getting onions and garlic and inulin and prebiotic fibers and other sources of things that nourish bacteria, you're fine. You're fine.
Yeah. Well, I think, again, there's doing things well and not doing things right. If someone was to do a ketogenic diet and eat processed salami, processed cheese, right? Canola oil, never have a vegetable, like, we have a problem. But if we're looking at you're really paying attention to the quality of the food, because you can do any diet. I mean, so Dr. Winters had a patient, she was a young girl, and we're going to talk about this at one point in the show. And they got her cancer in remission. And then her mom, because I think that the girl had to go through some chemo, ended up giving her a lot of green juices, and the cancer came back. And it was the green juices, because even though it was organic green juice, it still had glyphosate in it. And so the glyphosate triggered the cancer tumor again. So people think, oh, but I should be drinking green juice. Oh, but it's organic. It still has glyphosate in it, possibly, depending on if they cross-pollinate, if you're still in the same field with where they're treating one half of the land with glyphosate and the other half with not. So you can't just assume because it's green juice and it's organic that it's actually good for you in some ways, obviously, because it condenses nutrition. But as you know, I could talk to you all day long about all this, because it's where I started in terms of caring about my own health, to want to take control over my life and my health, and knowing and seeing that if you do things now, it affects you in the future. And so if you want a different future, change what you do now. And it's pretty simple. It's pretty easy, but you have to care about it. You have to care about your body, and you have to be willing to make changes and if you don't want to make them now, you might be forced to make them later. So either pay now for the better quality of food and a little bit of devices, or pay the hospital to, house you and do all the expensive procedures later. So I'm all about the prevention, and I want people to be informed. I want them to follow you. And why don't we talk about your podcast real fast? So is it launched? Are you doing it?
It is launched. It's called Defiant Health.
Defiant Health? I love it.
And it's doing what you're doing. It's talking about health in an unrestrained way. And because it's not coming from, this, JJ, health is not coming from the doctor. It's not coming from TV shows on health. I watch some of these shows, and they're just, it's horrible, the kind of information being passed on by my colleagues. I wish this wasn't true. I went through 17 years of education and training, and then 25 years of practice. I saw all the dirty laundry. I saw the sausage being made, and it's not pretty. But that's what passes for the prevailing standard. It's terrible. It's unacceptable. It's disgusting, but it continues, and it makes a lot of money. So that's what Defiant Health is all about, just like what you're doing right now.
Awesome. So, okay. Well, podcast listeners, listen to podcasts. So check out Dr. Davis's podcast, Defiant Health. I know I will be, and maybe he will even consider having me as a guest. So I want to thank you again for coming on the show. I want to say to everyone who's listening or watching, he'll be back with his book. When does your book launch, and when are you coming back?
February 1st of 2022. So I'll come back anytime, JJ. It's a pleasure talking to you, because I know you're after the same thing I am. That is the truth, not BS, not profiting, just the truth. It's so hard to get the truth nowadays.
Yes, it is. And the name of your new book coming out?
Super Gut.
Super Gut. I love it. All right. Thank you so much for your time. Again, I was like, where are we going to go with this conversation? There's so much we could talk about. There's so much time that we could have. And I do want to invite you to consider anytime you have something new you want to talk about and you want to put it somewhere else, you call me. Like, you're welcome on the show anytime. There's so much. JJ. There is so much to talk about. There's so much to share with people to empower them to make choices that feel good for them and that work, and that will avoid doctors and hospitals and pills and prescriptions and hospitalizations and diseases they don't need, because we have really all the information that we need and at our fingertips if we're just willing to implement it. So I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, JJ.